I just want to finish some thoughts on German military weakness, and then I'm going to go on to the deceit of FDR. I already covered how I think that the Battle of Britain marked the point at which Germany could not achieve its political end militarily. And this, we could debate that, but then, as I mentioned in another video, on June 22nd, 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. And this is, of course, the biggest war in history. And if the Germans couldn't win a war against Great Britain, the idea that they could now win a war against Great Britain and the USSR, man, I mean, this is before the United States was involved. And talk about biting off more than you could chew. Now, Hitler gave kind of two reasons for this. It's true if you read Mein Kampf that he kind of, imagined Germany establishing long-term colonies in the East. However, he did not fight World War II to make Mein Kampf happen. This kind of a misconception a lot of people have. I mean, he thought of Mein Kampf, it was in his mind, so it can't be 100% separated, but he fought it for more short-term political gains. He wanted Danzig. He got in a war with Poland over it. Long story, I don't want to get into it, but there was that, but the main reason is because he thought that the English would never, he didn't really like fighting the English. He always considered England and Germany to be natural allies. And as astute as Hitler was politically, I don't know how he could have made this mistake, because the British policy up until World War II, this is something that's actually changed since then, is to have always opposed there being a hegemon on Europe. If there's someone who's going to rule Europe, the British are against them. So if Napoleon looks like he's going to run Europe, then the British are going to help the Spanish and the Germans against Napoleon. If the Spanish look like they're going to run Europe, the other way around. If Louis XIV looks like he's going to run Europe, they're going to ally with the Dutch. And if the Germans look like they're going to run Europe, the UK is going to help the Russians or whoever. And actually, they don't do this for the EU now, so this is actually a big change in the last, something that has been the case for 400 years has changed. Although, if you listen to the guys at the Daily Bell, they will allege that the EU is actually part of the Anglo-American establishment. I don't know if that's true, but in any event, he believed that, Hitler believed that the British would give up if Russia was eliminated. And he thought that if we could eliminate Russia, then the British would come to terms. But obviously, if we could, that's like I said in the earlier video, if they could only conquer Eurasia. Okay, conquering the USSR is only, it's 50% of conquering Eurasia. And when you're already fighting a war against an enemy you can't really beat, the UK, that's extremely unwise. Now, the German military, the best military in the world, if not the largest, fighting against the Soviet Union that had the misfortune of being ruled by Stalin, who had killed most of the general staff and ruled in such a horrifying way that it just didn't. It was poorly won. The Germans, annihilated huge armies, and literally 150 divisions of the Soviet military were destroyed the first couple of months. However, the battle in the East did not change on Stalingrad. It turned the winter of 1941, just around, actually slightly before D-Day. The maximum extent of the penetration when it became very close to Moscow in the central, close to Leningrad in the north. In the south, they got to Rostov-on-Don. They were very... I'll use the reference Germany in the Second World War. Like I said, it's a 10-volume work. I've only read the first 5, but Volume 3 is about the invasion, the first 6 months of the invasion of the USSR. that winter was worse than Stalingrad in terms of the number of soldiers that they lost and the strategic retreat. They had to retreat and give up many thousands of square miles, especially in the central area. They didn't have to retreat that far in the south or that far in the north. Major setback. And if you look at the numbers, the Wehrmacht lost about 1.5 million soldiers, mostly wounded, but also many captured and many killed that first 6-month period. And by scraping the bottom of the barrel, they could get maybe 1 million back. So that's a 500,000 shortfall, which they made up with Italian troops and Romanian troops, and anyone who knows anything about World War II, that is it's not really a replacement. So this is just the coda of the Germany's not that strong. Now, this is the predicate, the argument that FDR's deceit, which is basically a matter of record, is justified because of the evil of the enemies we're facing. And the two problems with that: one, our allies, arguably just as evil, possibly more evil than our enemies. Two, they weren't really a threat to us. Now, I said this in the Depression video, and again, you never know what's in someone's mind, but it seems to me that FDR didn't really have a concrete ideology, at least in terms of economics. It's possible he did have things he really believed, but he wanted to be famous. He wanted to be a renowned president. And actually, he looked up to Woodrow Wilson, and that was kind of his archetype. He wanted to do things that he thought would be remembered. And when he was first elected in 1932, World War II, was the future. No one knew what was going to happen. I'm sure there were some people who speculated there might be another war, but it wouldn't have been in his thinking. He focused on being famous by combating the Depression. He just tried any trick he thought might work. Anybody who could, some professor would come and say, "Hey, you need to do this," and he would, if it struck his fancy, he'd try that. If someone else came and argued the opposite, he might try that. And this, of course, made the Depression a lot worse, because then people didn't know how to invest, because for all you know, the next day, whatever you invested in could be cartelized or whatever. However, once World War II began in September of 1939, he was shrewd enough to realize that, hey, this is going to be a big war. If he can be the president during the war, that will solidify his greatness, his place in history. And of course, as much as I hate to admit it, he was absolutely correct in that. He is a demigod now, and he's significantly risen in status since he's been dead. If you look at the time, of course, lots of Republicans hated him. Now he's the god of both parties. He's the only two who rise above him are Lincoln and Washington. And that, I think, will change, actually, because I think that as we become more socialist, his star rises ever farther as we descend into hell. But anyway, he wanted to be in the war, and Americans were against the war for the right reasons, I might add. And he was presented with a dilemma here, because the United States both Germany and Japan were in positions where they were fighting for their lives already, and it wouldn't have made any sense under any circumstances, almost under any circumstances, to get in a war with the United States. And so they went to great lengths, especially Germany, to avoid doing that. And this puts FDR in an interesting position. He wants to get in a war with people who don't want to get in a war with him, and the people don't want to get in a war with. Now, he engaged in a long dialogue with Churchill, who, just like in World War I, the British did everything in their power to convince Americans to aid them. And in his correspondence with Churchill, he would basically say, "Yeah, I want to get in the war, but people aren't ready. Let me get elected. Let the congressional election go," or whatever. He said he was trying to get the Americans to go for it, to pull them. And of course, this is the story we're given today, but only that this isn't deceitful. He's somewhat smarter than dumb isolationist Americans just didn't know, how it was for their own good to do this. Thank you, Uncle Cripple. But he pursued a deliberately belligerent policy, first towards Germany. The fixation was to Europe and to Germany. The fact that Japan was having a war was basically unrelated. We were mad about that because we had a long history with China. We'd say you should be nice to China, but Roosevelt is part of the Eastern Anglo establishment. They're very smitten with England, unfortunately, and have been. And Germany was perceived as the more powerful of the two enemies, and he did everything, giving aid to Germany's enemies. When Lend-Lease was passed, we started sending aid to Great Britain, to Greece, which at the time hadn't yet been conquered, to Yugoslavia, later to the USSR. That's, of course, blatant non-neutrality. He also started ordering the Navy to attack German submarines, which they did. He sunk some of them. He ordered the military to occupy certain British areas so that those troops would be freed. So notably Iceland. Iceland was part of Denmark when Germany invaded Denmark. The UK occupied Iceland, and he just said, "Oh well, you can have your soldiers fight something else. We'll send troops to occupy Iceland for you." The same thing happened in Greenland. So clearly, this is not neutral. He said the territorial waters of the United States, I believe they went out 3 miles at the time. Now they go out 12. I think back then they went 3 or 5. I might have that wrong. And he at one point said, "Oh, you know what? Our territorial waters now extend towards the Azores, halfway across the Atlantic, and we will sink any German subs we find in that area." And he ordered the Navy to do that. Hitler, showed restraint. He never, he said, "Okay, we'll give you space." So they already had plenty to do without fighting a war against the United States, which makes what happened later very surprising. Germany signed a treaty with Japan. The treaty was aimed at the United States, basically, and it said, if you are attacked, then we will have to attack the person that attacks you. So, say United States, and I think this is what Hitler was thinking, if the United States ever attacked Germany, which FDR was practically attempting to do, Japan would have to attack the United States. And of course, Hitler's probably thinking, oh, maybe they won't attack us if they think they have to fight Japan also. This wasn't a case of FDR outsmarting Hitler. This was a case of Hitler not understanding what FDR was really trying to do. FDR immediately said, okay, we can get in a war with Germany if we can just get in a war with Japan. And he went to the Navy, and he went to the Office of Naval Intelligence, and said, what will it take to provoke Japan to attack us? And if you want a good source on this, see Robert Stinnett's book, The Day of Deceit. If you don't want to read it, go on ScottHortonshow.com, type Robert Stinnett. There's probably 4 or 5 hours of interviews with this guy. And just to be clear, this guy is all for World War II and all for the deceit. He favors what happened, but he just documents that, hey, we should know that he was a liar. Anyway, the Navy recommended all these actions that we should do to provoke Japan. Japan, it's famous, Yamamoto said the United States is a sleeping giant that, we should never get in a war with. And it's not like a secret, everybody knew that. But the way it appeared was not that Japan had a choice between not a war with the United States and war with the United States. It looked like the United States was going to go to war with Japan. And specifically with the oil embargo. An oil embargo is an act of war. To say nothing else of the other belligerent things the United States did. To them, it looked like we can either wait for the United States to go to war on their terms, or we can go to war with the United States on our terms. And that's eventually what they chose. Now, I'm not condoning what they did, but I'm saying that it was provoked, and the fact, the idea that the United States was, just neutral, watching baseball games, uninterested. Maybe the American people were, but the American government was actively doing everything it could to make this happen. And this is really not debated anymore. In fact, right after World War II, a lot of scholars kind of picked up on this, and they just kind of felt like, hey, we all have a good feeling about World War II. Let's not rock the boat with this information too much. But it is out there, so I think it's pretty much taken between the military weakness of the enemies, the wickedness and vileness of our allies. We put it together, and all of a sudden the casus belli is blown out of the water.